They called them gods, but their works looked more like engineering. Across deserts, jungles, and oceans, ancient builders raised monuments aligned with the stars, structures too precise, too complex to belong only to myth. Civilizations that never met shared the same numbers, the same ratios, the same obsession with the sky. Then, without warning, the knowledge vanished. The texts fell silent. The stones were left behind. Who were these beings humanity once called divine? What were they building, and why did they leave? From the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the temples of the Andes, every ruin still points upward, as if waiting for something to return. Tonight, we follow the traces they left across time, decoding a world that once believed heaven and earth were one. This is the gods who ruled earth, what made them leave. The arrival in stone. Across the high plateaus of Mesopotamia, long before writing or war, people built platforms of mud brick and stone. Around 4000 BCE, near the banks of the Euphrates, they raised the first ziggurats, tiered towers, meant not to reach the heavens, but to bring the heavens down. Clay tablets from Uruk mention figures called the Anunnaki, described not as spirits or ancestors, but as those who descended from the sky to make order upon the earth. In these early cities, every grain store, law tablet, and irrigation gate was said to operate under their instruction. Sumerian priests claimed that kings were only caretakers of divine property, acting in the name of these unseen overseers. The gods were not yet myth. They were administrators. At Eridu, considered by later records to be the first city, the Temple of Enki was rebuilt 18 times on the same foundation. Each layer sealed the last, as if the inhabitants feared to disturb the original builders. Archaeologists found fish bones, copper tools, and burned clay that suggest long occupation interrupted by sudden desertion. The earliest stratum contains killing-fired bricks imprinted with reed marks, but the measurements are unusually precise, each side aligned to cardinal directions within a single degree. Modern surveyors remark that such accuracy required instruments not yet found among Sumerian relics. By 3000 BCE, new centers appeared at Nippur and Lagash. Their priests told of sky chariots Mu that shone like polished bronze and roared like storms. Cylinder seals show figures in horned helmets manipulating controls before winged discs. To later scribes, these became symbols of power, but to those who carved them, they were literal. A text from the library of Ashurbanipal, copied 1,000 years after the first temples, records a line. They measured the fields with beams of light and placed the boundaries of mankind. No one alive could explain what that meant. Egypt's first dynasties arose soon after. The pyramid texts of the 5th and 6th dynasties speak of the Shemsuhor, the followers of Horus, who ruled before the pharaohs. Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BCE, claimed these beings reigned for 13,900 years before the first human king. He called them gods, but in his list they are arranged like dynasties, reign lengths, succession orders, and recorded calamities. In Abydos, at the temple of Seti I, a curious relief shows shapes resembling modern aircraft, one like a helicopter, another like a jet. Scholars say these are palimpsests, overlapping carvings from reused stone. Yet visitors in the 19th century already described them as machines of heaven. Across the ocean, the temples of Tiahuanaco in Bolivia sit 12,000 feet above sea level. Their builders shaped andesite blocks weighing up to 100 tons, fitted with interlocking grooves and metal clamps. The people who lived nearby when the Spanish arrived said the city was built before the moon had joined the earth. Carbon samples from the sediment below the foundations date to around 12,000 BCE, thousands of years, before the rise of agriculture. At the center stands the Gate of the Sun, carved with a figure holding staffs, surrounded by rays and winged faces. Early explorers thought it depicted a god descending through light. Locals called him Viracocha. Ancient sources describe a pattern: sudden appearance of advanced order, followed by decline. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki departed to the heavens. In Egypt, Horus ascended to the stars. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl sailed east upon the sea, promising to return. The language of departure is constant. They left, but no text says they died. The Sumerians even recorded farewell feasts, offerings laid upon altars, with inscriptions such as, "For the gods who no longer speak." When Sir Leonard Woolley excavated Ur in the 1920 seconds, he uncovered a layer of sterile clay 8 feet thick between two cities. It stretched unbroken across the site, suggesting a flood strong enough to erase all life. Beneath it, he found artifacts belonging to an earlier culture pottery of different design, copper tools of higher quality. Woolley believed he had found evidence of a great flood that ended a forgotten era. His work gave archaeological weight to the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, in which the survivor Utnapishtim speaks of gods abandoning the world as waters rose. Farther east, in the Indus Valley, around 1900 BCE, Mohenjo-Daro was suddenly deserted. Skeletons were found lying in the streets, their hands stretched forward as if frozen mid-flight. The city's drainage system was more advanced than that of later empires, but it fell into silence without sign of battle or fire. A British researcher, David Davenport, wrote in 1979 that the area showed traces of vitrification stone melted by intense heat. He compared it to test sites from nuclear detonations. His claim was dismissed, but fragments of fused brick remain in museum collections. Similar puzzles appear elsewhere. The Olmec heads of La Venta, weighing 40 tons each, show African and Polynesian features but predate known transoceanic travel. The statues of Easter Island face inland, not outward, as if waiting for someone to return. In the Andes, lines etched into the Nazca Desert depict animals visible only from high above monkey, condor, spider, each drawn in a single continuous stroke. Maria Reich, the German mathematician who spent her life studying them, once said, "They are not messages to gods. They are messages from gods, left for us to measure." By the first millennium BCE, human kings began to call themselves gods. In Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar II built the Hanging Gardens to rival the dwelling of the Anunnaki. In Egypt, Ramses II inscribed his name beside that of Ra. The divine had become hereditary, not visible. Power shifted from sky to throne. Yet beneath this human confidence lingered unease, a memory that the real gods had left and might return. In the Hebrew Book of Enoch, written around the 2nd century BCE, the Watchers descend to teach men weapon-making and metalwork, then are cast out for interfering with creation. The Dead Sea Scrolls repeat this account almost word for word. Greek myths tell of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods. Hindu texts speak of Vimana's flying cities and celestial weapons. The patterns overlap as if drawn from a single vanished memory. Archaeologist Zakaria Sitchin, writing in the 1970 seconds, re-examined Sumerian tablets and argued that the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru, which passes near Earth every 3,600 years. He suggested their departure was cyclical, not final. Mainstream scholars reject this idea, yet the notion of gods as travelers rather than immortals endures in popular culture. Ancient depictions of helmets, breathing tubes, and fire chariots echo in modern imagery of astronauts and spacecraft. Across millennia, what remains constant is not proof, but precision. Alignment to stars, mathematical proportion, and sudden mastery of engineering appear in cultures that supposedly never met. The pyramids of Giza, the temples of Teotihuacan, and the ziggurats of Babylon all share the same ratio, between base and height 2 times pi. The coincidence is difficult to explain through imitation alone. When asked about the origin of their design, Egyptian priests told the Greek historian Herodotus, "We built them as they were shown to us." The gods, whoever they were, left behind geometry, myths, and silence. Their images became stone, their voices turned into ritual, their tools into legends of thunder and light. Archaeology records their presence without naming them. The question that remains is not what they were, but what made them leave. The builders beneath the sky. In the valleys of the Tigris and the Nile, where the first great cities grew, the sky was more than a ceiling of stars. It was a calendar, a map, and a witness. Around 3000 BCE, priests began measuring the heavens with reed poles and sighting stones. They traced the paths of Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades across seasons, marking when floods came or fields turned dry. In Sumer, the temple of Iana at Uruk faced directly toward the rising point of Venus, the planet associated with Inanna. Each year, the priests recorded the moment when its light reappeared after disappearing into the sun's glare. That reappearance marked the renewal of life, the beginning of planting, and the supposed return of divine favor. The same idea appeared independently in Egypt. The pyramids at Giza, built around 2550 BCE, are aligned with such precision that the Great Pyramid deviates from true north by only 3 arc minutes. Its descending passage points to the pole star of that time, Thuban, while narrow shafts in the king's chamber align with Orion's belt and Sirius. When night fell on midsummer, the stars shone directly into those channels, as if the builders had created pathways of light between heaven and stone. Herodotus wrote that the Egyptians believed the souls of pharaohs became stars in Orion's region, returning to the celestial realm of Osiris. The pyramid, then, was not a tomb, it was a launch point. The pattern spread across continents. At Stonehenge, in southern Britain, construction began around 3000 BCE and continued for more than a millennium. The heel stone, outside the circle, frames the sunrise at the summer solstice, while opposing trilithons mark the midwinter sunset. Recent excavations found cremated remains buried near the site, suggesting it was used for both observation and ritual. The stones were dragged from quarries nearly 200 kilometers away, each weighing up to 25 tons. The effort required generations of planning, yet the purpose was not shelter or defense. It was alignment, a perfect conversation between earth and sky. In the Andes, thousands of years later, the Temple of the Sun at Machu Picchu served the same function. Windows in the Intihuatana stone capture sunlight precisely at the equinox, when day and night are equal. At that moment, the Inca believed the sun was tied to the earth by invisible cords, preventing it from drifting away. Spanish chroniclers, who recorded the practice in the 1500s, noted that the priests used polished silver mirrors to direct sunlight into caves for ceremonies of renewal. These rites were not worship in the modern sense, they were maintenance, the act of keeping the connection stable. In the deserts of Egypt, Nabta Playa predates both Stonehenge and the pyramids. Discovered in the 1972, this circle of weathered sandstone blocks was built between 7000 and 6500 BCE. When the stones are viewed from a central point, they align with the rising of Orion's belt at the summer solstice. Archaeologists from the University of Colorado concluded that it was the world's earliest astronomical observatory. Yet the site lies deep in what was once a savanna, suggesting a people with no cities, no writing, and little agriculture were already measuring the heavens with mathematical accuracy. A similar mystery lies in Chichen Itzá, built by the Maya between the 8th and 12th centuries CE. The Pyramid of Kukulkan produces a visual illusion during the equinoxes, the shadow of a serpent undulating along its staircase as the sun sets. Each of its 4 sides has 91 steps, totaling 364, with the platform on top completing the solar year. Mayan codices describe the builders as guided by the Watchers of the Sky, who taught them to divide time into precise cycles of 260, 365, and 584 days. The last number matches the synodic period of Venus. To the Maya, the gods were not distant, they were synchronized. When archaeologist Gerald Hawkins analyzed Stonehenge in 1965 using a computer, he concluded it could predict eclipses. His calculations matched patterns later confirmed by astronomical software. The builders had encoded long-term cycles, the precession of the moon's nodes, without written records or metal tools. To achieve that, they must have observed for centuries, passing measurements through memory and oral tradition. A discipline that modern science would call astronomy was once a sacred duty. At Abu Simbel, in southern Egypt, 2 colossal statues of Ramses II face east. Twice each year on February 22 and October 22, the rising sun penetrates the temple's inner chamber, illuminating the statues of Ramses and Ra-Horakhti. Archaeologists verified that these dates mark his coronation and birthday. The effect was deliberate, not accidental. When engineers relocated the entire monument in 1968 to save it from flooding by the Aswan Dam, they had to calculate the new placement with modern instruments to preserve that same beam of light. The builders of 1250 BCE had achieved it with sand, rope, and shadow. These monuments suggest more than devotion, they reveal transmission. The same geometrical proportions repeat across lands with no known contact. The ratio of height to base in the Great Pyramid, 1 to 2 pi, appears again in the temples of Teotihuacan. The angles of the Mayan pyramids and the orientation of the ziggurats of share nearly identical inclinations. Some researchers, like Alexander Thom, proposed the existence of a shared unit of measurement, the megalithic yard, used from Britain to the Near East. It measures about 0.829 meters, consistent across dozens of sites. No evidence of its invention survives, yet its precision suggests coordination. Ancient texts offer glimpses of how these builders viewed their work. The Enuma Elish, a Babylonian creation epic from around 1100 BCE, describes the god Marduk measuring the structure of the deep and setting the stars in their courses. The Egyptian Book of the Dead instructs the soul to follow the roads of the stars, for they are the writing of the gods. The language of alignment was language of obedience. To build correctly was to participate in cosmic order. In China, the pyramids near Xi'an, once covered in white clay and capped with gold, were arranged along cardinal directions. Emperor Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum, built around 210 BCE, mirrors the heavens, a dome representing the sky with constellations inlaid in pearls. Historical texts claim rivers of mercury flowed within to symbolize celestial paths. When scientists tested the soil above the tomb in 2020, they detected abnormally high levels of mercury vapor, confirming at least part of the legend. Across centuries and continents, the builders acted as if responding to the same instruction: observe the sky, reflect it in stone, and anchor the heavens to the earth. When patterns shifted, when certain stars no longer aligned or rituals failed, the response was not adaptation, but abandonment. Cities like Nabta Playa, Mohenjo-Daro, and Teotihuacan were deserted soon after astronomical cycles changed. The builders had done their part. The alignment had served its time. The monuments remain as coordinates, fixed points in a vast geometry. They do not tell stories, they measure silence. And somewhere within that silence lies the trace of the gods the ancients believed once ruled from the sky, the messengers of fire. Across many cultures, ancient records describe moments when the sky opened and something descended. Sometimes the accounts call them gods, sometimes they are fire, light, or metal. But the tone of these early witnesses is rarely one of worship, it is of observation. In the 3rd millennium BCE, clay tablets from the Sumerian city of Lagash describe bright ones who came down in boats of the sky. One tablet in the Louvre Museum mentions a craft called the Makaru, meaning vehicle of blazing brightness. The text states that it landed near the temple of Ningirsu, leaving behind a burnt mark upon the plain. The symbol used for this word is the same cuneiform later adopted to mean star. To the scribes, celestial movement and divine arrival were the same event, recorded without mythic flourish, as if noting an eclipse. In Egypt, a papyrus dated to around 1450 BCE, known as the Tully Papyrus, describes circular fiery discs seen hovering above the sky of Thebes for several days. The translation made by Alberto Tully of the Vatican Museum claims that Pharaoh Thutmose III witnessed the event. They were more numerous than all the armies, the text says, and they shone brighter than the sun. The papyrus continues, the fish of the lake became boiled. Egyptologists debate its authenticity, but if genuine, it represents one of the earliest descriptions of aerial phenomena beyond natural explanation. A similar pattern appears in India. The Mahabharata, compiled between 400 BCE and 400 CE, describes flying vehicles called vimanas. In Book 6, it records a weapon that glowed like the sun, with smoke and flames as of a blazing fire, reducing the armies to ashes. Some translations refer to iron thunderbolts and a radiance like 10,000 suns. British civil engineer J.W. Davenport, who studied the Sanskrit texts in the 1,970 seconds, compared these descriptions to nuclear detonations. He pointed to passages detailing how survivors washed in rivers and lost their hair symptoms resembling radiation exposure. In Central America, the Maya Popol Vuh recounts beings who came from the sky in shining houses. These were not gods in the moral sense, but engineers who measured the face of the earth. The Aztecs told a similar story of Quetzalcoatl, described as a pale, bearded man who arrived by sea, surrounded by light and smoke, teaching the arts of calendar making and metallurgy. When he left, he promised to return from the east. Centuries later, when Hernán Cortés landed on the same coast in 1519, local priests believed that prophecy fulfilled. Ancient Greece recorded its own messengers of fire. In 467 BCE, the historian Pliny the Elder wrote of shields of flame seen in the sky near the island of Lemnos. The philosopher Anaxagoras, writing at the same time, suggested that these lights were stones from the heavens set alight by motion through air. His explanation was rational for his era, yet he added that one object remained for hours, turning as though by will. Later, in 74 BCE, Plutarch described a huge body, molten and fiery, falling between the armies of Mithridates and the Romans, after which both sides fled. The incident occurred near Phrygia, the same region associated with the myth of Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith who forged thunder in fire. In China, chronicles of the Zhou dynasty mention dragons of metal that appeared in the western sky. The Huinanzi, a text from the 2nd century BCE, records that the emperor rode upon a vessel of fire to survey the 4 directions. In 747 CE, during the Tang dynasty, the astronomer Tuan Cheng-shi wrote in his Miscellany of Notes, "In the 2nd month, a bright object came from the north, making a sound like thunder and spreading sparks that fell to the ground. Fragments of iron later found in the region were kept in temples as divine relics." Japan's Kojiki speaks of the god Ninigi descending from the heavens, carrying a mirror that shone like sunlight. The event is described not as mythic metaphor, but as historical sequence, a descent, a mission, a settlement. The mirror, later enshrined as one of Japan's 3 imperial treasures, was said to hold the reflection of the divine. Modern visitors see it only covered, yet it remains part of the regalia used during imperial enthronement ceremonies. Accounts of fire from the sky also appear in biblical texts. The Book of Ezekiel, written around 593 BCE, contains a detailed vision of a wheel within a wheel descending from the north, its rims full of eyes round about. The prophet describes the noise as the sound of rushing waters, and the movement as lightning running back and forth. Scholars have interpreted it as spiritual metaphor, yet the description matches mechanical motion more closely than poetic imagery. In 1968, NASA engineer Josef Blumrich analyzed the account and published The Spaceships of Ezekiel, concluding that the design could represent a vehicle with 4 helicopter-like rotors. When viewed together, these records share certain features: light, sound, rotation, descent, and transformation of the ground. Archaeological layers sometimes confirm that events involving great heat occurred independently of volcanic or meteor activity. At Tal el Hammam, in modern Jordan, excavations since 2005 have revealed melted pottery and a destruction layer dated to around 1650 BCE. The site is thought by some to be the biblical city of Sodom. Geologists from Trinity Southwest University concluded that the damage could have been caused by an airburst similar to the 1908 Tunguska event in Siberia, where a meteor exploded mid-air, flattening 2,000 square kilometers of forest. Tunguska itself generated myths within a day. Witnesses reported a cylinder of fire descending silently, followed by a blast brighter than the sun. Trees were scorched in a radial pattern, and compasses failed for days afterward. Leonid Kulik's expedition in 1927 found no crater, only soil fused into glass. The Evenki people who lived nearby described the event as the god Ogdi's chariot falling from the sky. If there was a connection between such events and the ancient stories of divine visitors, it was not always peaceful. Some texts describe destruction rather than instruction. In Sumerian legend, the god Ninurta used a stone of terrible radiance to flatten rebellious cities. In the Mahabharata, Arjuna's weapon of fire annihilates, as if all creatures were consumed at once. The imagery is consistent: sudden descent, unbearable heat, then silence. In 218 BCE, Roman historian Livy recorded a phantom ship seen shining in the sky above the city of Arpi. The citizens gathered to watch until it vanished behind clouds. 4 centuries later, in 76 CE, a similar sight was noted by Josephus during the siege of Jerusalem. Chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds. The Roman garrison interpreted it as an omen. Modern astronomers suggest atmospheric phenomena, yet the description of movement and formation persists across regions and eras. The fire, whether metaphorical or real, always accompanied transition between ages, between rulers, between gods. When the lights came, they marked beginnings or endings. They arrived as warnings, as teachers, or as judgments, and then departed, leaving behind nothing but marks in clay, melted stone, or memory. The silent architects. In many ancient cities, the stonework speaks louder than the texts. There are walls whose seams are so precise that a blade cannot enter them, terraces where stones weigh hundreds of tons yet sit in silent balance, and corridors that remain level across centuries despite earthquakes. These are not marks of ornament. They are the language of builders whose methods have been forgotten. In Egypt, Beneath the sands near Giza lies the unfinished obelisk of Aswan. It measures 42 meters in length and weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. It remains attached to the quarry floor, cracked in one corner. The tool marks on its sides are round and shallow, as if made by drills rather than chisels. Archaeologists from the 1992nd who studied these grooves noted that the cuts spiral slightly, suggesting rotation. Yet the only known tools of that era were copper, too soft to shape granite. The surrounding rock bears no trace of the copper flakes that such work would have produced. The obelisk rests there, half-born, its separation technique still unclear. At Giza itself, the Great Pyramid contains more than 2 million limestone blocks, each averaging 2.5 tons. The heaviest, near the king's chamber, exceeds 70 tons. These were lifted over 40 meters into the air, with no record of ramps or pulleys surviving. Greek historian Herodotus claimed in 440 BCE that machines made of short wooden planks were used to lift them step by step. None of these machines have ever been found. The core blocks are set within millimeters of each other, the mortar thin as paper. Laser scans in 2018 showed deviations of less than 1 inch across the entire 230-meter base, a precision comparable to modern engineering. At Baalbek, in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, stand 3 colossal stones known as the Trilithon. Each weighs roughly 800 tons. A nearby quarry holds an even larger block, the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighing over 1,000 tons, cut but never moved. Roman builders later added temples atop this platform. Yet the older foundation stones lie beneath, their origin predating the Roman phase by centuries. No contemporary culture in the region left a record of transporting objects that size. In 2014, archaeologists uncovered another monolith beneath the quarry dust, estimated at 1,650 tons, still larger than any known lifted stone. The walls of Cusco in Peru show a different kind of mastery. The stones of the Sacsayhuaman fortress are polygonal, fitted with up to 12 edges, carved so closely that even modern laser cutters would find difficulty replicating the joins. Some blocks weigh more than 300 tons and interlock like a puzzle, surviving earthquakes that shattered later colonial structures. Local Quechua traditions claim that the stones were softened by the priests before placement. Spanish chroniclers in the 1500s recorded the same phrase. Chemical tests on the surface of some blocks reveal subtle vitrification melting of the outer layer, though, whether from heat or chemical treatment remains uncertain. In Japan, the walls of Osaka Castle include stones weighing hundreds of tons, shaped with straight faces and gentle curves. One known as the Takoishi, or octopus stone, measures 59 cubic meters and weighs over 100 tons. Historical records attribute their placement to the 16th century, but engineers note that the lifting devices of that time could not bear such loads without breaking ropes or cranes. Some historians propose rolling or dragging, yet the stones rest on steep slopes that make such motion improbable. Across the world, in the ruins of Pumapunku near Lake Titicaca, lies stonework that challenges even theoretical reconstruction. Blocks of red sandstone and grey andesite are carved into 8 shapes with grooves and drill holes spaced at exact intervals. Archaeologist Arthur Poznansky, who documented the site in the early 1900s, measured the layout and concluded that it was aligned with the solstices around 17,000 BCE, a dating modern researchers dispute but have never fully disproven due to erosion. The geometry is machine-like, the edges sharp, even after centuries of weather. The question is not only how, but why. In India, the Kailasa temple of Ellora was carved downward from a single basalt cliff. Historians date it to the 8th century CE, built during the reign of King Krishna I of the Rashtrakuta dynasty. The entire complex columns, sculptures, sanctuaries was excavated from solid rock, removing an estimated 400,000 tons of stone. Modern engineers estimate that such work, using chisels and hammers alone, would require at least 200 years. Inscriptions suggest it was completed in less than 20. The technique remains undocumented. In the Mediterranean, the island of Malta hosts megalithic temples older than Stonehenge, such as Khauchar, Kim, and Menajdra, dating to around 3600 BCE. Their massive slabs form precise doorways and corbelled roofs. Menajdra's central temple aligns with the rising sun during equinoxes, casting a shaft of light that crosses its main corridor. Archaeologists have found no evidence of writing, yet the builders worked with measured symmetry and solar geometry. The precision extends beyond weight and alignment. In the Great Pyramid, the internal passages form angles that correspond exactly to mathematical constants later defined in Greek geometry. The ratio of the perimeter to the height equals 2 pi. The angle of descent in the main passage matches the tangent of 1 minus 7th. These relationships appear deliberate, not coincidental. Egyptologists often attribute them to trial and error or aesthetic sense, but no intermediate stages exist to show experimentation. Microscopic studies of the surfaces of some ancient Egyptian limestone blocks, conducted by the French materials scientist Joseph Davidovits in the 1982, suggested that portions were reconstituted stone, a kind of early geopolymer concrete. If true, it would imply chemical knowledge lost until modern times. Yet the granite blocks from Aswan show no such process. Their crystalline structure remains unaltered. This combination, cast limestone and carved granite, would require distinct, specialized technologies operating simultaneously. In Mesoamerica, the site of Teotihuacan was laid out with such scale and precision that its main avenue aligns 5 degrees east of true north, mirroring the setting of the Pleiades. The pyramids of the Sun and Moon share a geometric ratio with the pyramids of Giza. When measured, both sets fit the ratio 1:1, 618, known as the golden mean. Scholars debate whether this is coincidence or an unconscious preference for symmetry, yet the consistency across continents remains difficult to dismiss. The deeper question concerns purpose. Ancient builders described their work not as architecture, but as service. Inscriptions from Egypt call the pyramids houses of eternity. In Sumerian texts, the ziggurat is the binding between heaven and earth. The Andean temples were steps for the gods to descend. The same phrase appears in Akkadian, Mayan, and Polynesian records. They were not monuments to human rulers, they were instruments of connection. No evidence shows that these cultures met or shared designs, yet their creations obey the same cosmic geometry. The builders, whoever they were, remained silent in the record. Their tools left only smooth cuts, melted corners, and stones that seemed too heavy for their time. They worked without signatures, without visible names, leaving only balance and precision as proof of their presence. The forgotten code. Numbers were once sacred. They were not only ways of counting, but the grammar through which the world could be described. Long before algebra or physics, the builders of ancient monuments encoded relationships of measure and time into stone. These numbers, repeated across continents, formed a quiet code, one that spoke of cycles, harmony, and unseen order. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid stands as the clearest example. Its height of 146.6 meters and base perimeter of 921.6 meters form a ratio that equals exactly 2 pi. This is not symbolic but precise, accurate to within 0.1%. If the pyramid's height represents the radius of a circle, its perimeter equals that circle's circumference. No written record explains this choice. The builders did not yet use the number pi as later mathematicians did, yet they measured it into stone. Egyptologist Flinders Petrie, who surveyed the pyramid in 1880, wrote that its precision could not have been obtained without a system of advanced mathematics. He found similar ratios in the smaller pyramids of Khafre and Menkaure, suggesting a shared standard. In Sumer, around 3200 BCE, scribes invented the sexagesimal system, counting by 60. They divided a circle into 360 degrees and an hour into 60 minutes. This same base still governs modern navigation and time. The reason for its choice is unknown. Some say it came from combining base 10 and base 12 systems. Others note that 60 divides easily by many numbers. Yet its presence in cultures far from Mesopotamia, Egyptian calendars, Babylonian star charts, Mayan ritual cycles, suggests an inherited pattern rather than coincidence. At Stonehenge, the diameter of the inner circle is 31.5 meters. When multiplied by the number of outer stones, 56, it yields 1,764, nearly identical to the number of weeks in 34 solar years, the length of the lunar eclipse cycle. Gerald Hawkins, who analyzed the site in the 1,960 seconds, believed the builders used the monument to predict eclipses, storing celestial time in architecture. Similar relationships appear in the design of the temples at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, whose galleries encode the lengths of solar and lunar cycles in cubits and paces. The Indus Valley civilization used precise measurement long before recorded mathematics. At Lothal and Harappa, archaeologists discovered ivory rulers marked in increments as small as 1.7 millimeters more accurate than any known from that period. The ratio of length to width in their standardized bricks is 4. 2. 1. Identical across hundreds of sites, separated by hundreds of kilometers. This standardization implies not only planning, but a governing code, perhaps one that expressed social order through proportion. In Mesoamerica, the Maya built entire cities as calendars. The pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza has 91 steps on each of its 4 sides, totaling 364, plus the top platform making 365. The structure is both monument and clock. The Mayan long count calendar, beginning on the 11th of August, 3114 BCE, divides time into baktons, katons, and tons, forming cycles of 144,000, 7,000, 200, and 360 days. These values repeat the base 20 and base 18 mathematics visible in the architecture. The pyramid's shadow serpent that appears on the equinox is not symbolic decoration. It is the visible motion of a mathematical principle expressed in stone. Across the Pacific, Polynesian navigators tracked stars using angular measurements that mirror those of Mesopotamian astronomers. On Easter Island, the Moai statues line paths that correspond to solstitial and lunar alignments. The islanders' oral traditions describe the builders as Ariki, the tall ones who counted the days. Their word for knowledge, rongo, also means to recite numbers. When missionaries recorded chants in the 19th century, they found sequences of rhythmic counts corresponding to star positions traces of a lost navigational mathematics. The builders of Teotihuacan encoded another constant. The Avenue of the Dead measures 2.64 kilometers, equal to 1/5 of a degree of Earth's circumference at that latitude. The base of the Pyramid of the Sun is 223.3 meters, matching the Saros cycle used to predict eclipses 223 lunar months. These relationships suggest not random design, but intention, the city itself as a scaled reflection of the planet and its celestial rhythms. In China, the builders of the Forbidden City arranged its plan around the number 9, the imperial symbol of perfection. There are 999 rooms, and the main staircase has 9 rows of 9 steps. The number 9 recurs in ancient cosmology worldwide. The Egyptians had 9 gods of Heliopolis, the Norse had 9 worlds, and the Maya counted 9 layers of the underworld. In astronomy, the 9th division of the sky marked the zenith, where the pole star stood. The same pattern of 9 divisions appears in early Sumerian tablets describing the heavens. Numbers also shaped sound. The Greek philosopher Pythagoras, active in the 6th century BCE, taught that musical harmony followed ratios of length and tension 2:1 for an octave, 3:2 for a fifth. He learned from Egyptian and Babylonian priests who had measured tone using plucked strings centuries earlier. The same numerical relationships appear in temple proportions. The Parthenon in Athens, built in the 5th century BCE, follows the ratio 9:4, corresponding to musical intervals known as perfect consonances. The builders may have sought to translate harmony into structure, a silent resonance between stone and sound. Even the placement of cities followed geometric rules. The layout of ancient Chinese capitals obeyed cardinal orientation, but also modular grids, whose spacing followed specific numbers derived from astronomy. The Roman architect Vitruvius, in his 10 books on architecture, written around 15 BCE, explained that temples should be based on human proportions: the length of the forearm, the span of the hand, the width of the foot. Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man later illustrated the same principle, though the concept itself came from far older traditions and encoded belief that number, geometry, and life were inseparable. At Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca, the Gate of the Sun bears a sequence of rectangular carvings arranged in groups of 11, 13, and 19. Researchers found that these numbers correspond to the solar-lunar calendar's correction cycle, 235 lunar months in 19 solar years. The same cycle, called the Metonic cycle, was known to Greek astronomers a millennium later. The repetition implies shared knowledge, not by direct contact, but through inherited understanding of celestial mathematics. Some theorists suggest these constants pi, phi, 360, 432, 108 form a universal code found in nearly every sacred monument. The number 432 appears in the Norse Edda, describing 432,000 warriors in Valhalla, in Hindu cosmology as the length of a Kali Yuga in years multiplied by 1,000, and in modern physics as harmonic ratios in acoustic resonance. The number 108 recurs in Buddhist prayer beads, Hindu temples, and the angular distance between Earth and Sun when expressed in solar diameters, whether coincidence or tradition. The persistence of these values across civilizations separated by oceans suggests a shared arithmetic of the cosmos. The code's origin remains unknown. It may have arisen from simple observation, the cycle of moon and sun, the symmetry of human limbs, the pleasing ratios of sound. Or it may be a relic of a deeper science, one that measured both heaven and earth with the same set of numbers. Whatever its source, these ratios continue to govern art, architecture, and timekeeping today, as if the world itself still moves by that forgotten count. The voices in stone. Across the world, old walls still whisper. Every chisel mark and carved sign is a fragment of a voice messages left for those who would come long after the builders were gone. In the deserts of Egypt, on the plateaus of South America, and in the forgotten valleys of Anatolia, words are inscribed into surfaces that should have long eroded. Some can be read. Others remain silent because no one remembers the language they were written in. In the Temple of Edfu, on the Nile's west bank, hieroglyphs describe an age before the pharaohs. They call it Zep Tepi, the first time. The walls recount how the gods lived among men and taught them the measure of all things. These inscriptions were carved between 237 and 57 BCE, yet they describe events thousands of years older. One passage speaks of the builders of light who raised the island from the flood. Archaeologists call it myth. Priests of that era called it history. Not far away, on the granite casing of the Great Pyramid, a few red ochre marks remain inside, hidden chambers, scribbles left by work crews, naming themselves the Gang of the Horus Hawk. Egyptologists point to these as proof of human authorship, but deeper inside, the hieroglyphs shift from labor notes to precision sequences, angled lines and circles, a pattern resembling star coordinates. The ceiling of the sarcophagus chamber is covered with black diorite stars, each one aligned to the real night sky at the moment of completion, around 2560 BCE. The builders did not merely decorate, they encoded position. In Mesopotamia, tablets discovered in the ruins of Nineveh carry inscriptions in cuneiform that read like technical logs. One fragment from the library of Ashurbanipal, dated around 650 BCE, lists instructions for constructing a shining tower to the heavens. It describes its base in units of nindan and kuz, exact measures used for surveying. Another tablet speaks of the god Ea providing plans written on lapis. The word translated as plans also means blueprint. When translated literally, it reads, "The design was made in the deep and brought to the surface." Across the ocean, in Mesoamerica, inscriptions on the walls of Palenque's Temple of Inscriptions record the life and death of King Pakal. When archaeologists opened his tomb in 1952, they found a sarcophagus lid covered in carvings. The image shows the ruler reclining in a strange craft, surrounded by flames and celestial symbols. Scholars interpret it as Pakal descending into the underworld. Others note that his posture and the surrounding panels resemble mechanical detail pedals, exhaust, even directional flow lines. The monument was not simply storytelling, it was technical art frozen in stone. Farther south, in Bolivia, the Gateway of the Sun at Tiwanaku contains a single continuous band of glyphs carved in relief. Despite decades of study, the language has never been fully deciphered. In 1978, archaeologist H.S. Bellamy proposed that the pattern records astronomical data cycles of the Sun and Moon over an 11,500-year period. Modern computer simulations confirm that the sequence could indeed represent a solar-lunar correlation. If true, the stone is not inscription alone, it is a calendar written in geometry. In Turkey, at Göbekli Tepe, pillars carved between 9,500 and 8,000 BCE bas-reliefs of foxes, vultures, and scorpions, each arranged in deliberate groups. When the carvings were analysed in 2017 by researchers from the University of Edinburgh, they found that the animal motifs matched constellations as they would have appeared in the night sky around 10,950 BCE. One stone, the so-called vulture stone, depicts a headless human figure beneath a scorpion and a vulture holding a sphere. Astronomers identified this as a record of a comet strike, possibly the one that triggered the Younger Dryas cold event. The carvings, therefore, may not be religious, but historical records of catastrophe preserved in symbolic form. On the island of Crete, the Phaistos disk remains one of archaeology's enigmas. Discovered in 1908, it bears 241 stamped symbols arranged in a spiral. Despite thousands of attempts, its meaning is still unknown. Some symbols resemble ships, others birds, others tools. Linear A, the writing system of the Minoans, also remains undeciphered. What makes the disk unique is its method of creation. The symbols were impressed with stamps, like printing, implying mass production before movable type was known. The language is silent, but the technology speaks. In Easter Island's Rapa Nui, the Rongorongo tablets contain lines of glyphs carved with obsidian flakes. Each line runs in reverse direction from the one before it, a style called bustrophodon, as the ox turns. When read with ultraviolet light, faint outlines of erased signs suggest that the tablets were reused. Only 24 examples survive, and none have been conclusively translated. Some researchers believe the script encodes genealogies or astronomical events. Local oral tradition says they were copied from sky writings, now lost. In the deserts of Saudi Arabia, along the ancient trade routes, stand thousands of Thamudic and Safaetic inscriptions carved into basalt. Many include depictions of tall figures with circular halos or helmets, surrounded by animals and tools. A recurring phrase translates as, "those who came from above." The meaning of this expression remains debated. Some call it metaphor, others literal record. On the other side of the world, in the Andes, the Inca left no alphabetic writing. Instead, they used quipu bundles of knotted cords made of dyed wool. The arrangement of knots recorded information numerically, but recent analysis shows that color and spacing may have encoded words or categories. One quipu, found at Puruchuco, matches census data carved later by Spanish officials, confirming that the cords carried language, not only numbers. Researchers at Harvard's HIPU database project now suspect the system could contain phonetic elements, making it a true written code, long dismissed as primitive bookkeeping. The same impulse appears in other cultures, words carved into permanence, combining number and image. The Mayan stelae of Copan use glyphs that represent both sound and time. A single glyph can mean a syllable, a god, or a date. The stelae marking 9.15.0, 0 inches their calendar corresponds to August 2731 CE, yet the same symbol forms part of the name of their sky deity, Itzamna. Writing and measurement were not separate, both were acts of alignment. Even in places where the language is known, the purpose of certain texts remains unclear. The Sumerian Kesh Temple hymn, one of the oldest literary works on earth, describes a structure fitted together like heaven and earth. It lists dozens of functions: the stairway for the sky, the chambers of stars, the place where the Mis are kept. The word Mi has no precise translation. It has been rendered as divine laws, technologies, or blueprints. The hymn treats them as tangible objects, guarded and transmitted. Across time, the medium changes from clay to granite, from knotted cords to copper plates, but the message persists, a belief that information must endure. The gods may leave, the kingdoms may fall, yet the words remain. They are neither prayers nor poetry, but coordinates, instructions, or memories pressed into the material world. The voices in stone speak slowly. They do not explain themselves. They wait, half deciphered, for the next set of hands to trace their grooves and wonder who first carved them and for whom. The age of cataclysm. At the edges of history, traces of destruction mark the soil. Thick layers of ash, melted glass, and oceanic silt appear in places that never shared an ocean. Myths from every continent remember the same events: an age when fire fell from the sky, waters rose beyond mountains, and cities were erased in a single night. The languages differ, but the sequence remains the same: warning, flood, silence, rebuilding. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerian king list speaks of rulers who reigned for thousands of years until the flood swept over. The tablet from Nippur, dated to around 2100 BCE, divides time into two eras, before the flood and after it. The transition is abrupt. Cities like Eridu, Bad Tibira, and Larak vanish from the record, replaced by new ones built on fresh layers of river clay. Excavations by Leonard Woolley at in 1929 uncovered precisely such a layer, 2.5 meters, of sterile silt, separating one civilization from another. Beneath it, lay pottery of a different style, as if belonging to an older people forgotten by those who rebuilt above them. The same memory survives in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim recounts a storm lasting 6 days and nights, covering even the highest mountains. The Akkadian tablets call the event a deluge, sent by the gods to cleanse the earth. In the Hebrew book of Genesis, compiled centuries later, Noah receives similar warning. Both accounts list the same sequence of events: a command to build a vessel, the use of pitch for sealing, the sending of birds to test the waters, and the eventual landing on a distant mountain. The details vary, but the origin feels shared, an echo of a real event filtered through faith. In Egypt, priests of Sais told the Greek philosopher Solon that their records spoke of a great flood that came from heaven. The story, preserved by Plato in the Timaeus and Critias, became the legend of Atlantis, a civilization drowned in a single night of misfortune. Plato placed the event 9,000 years before his own time, around 9,600 BCE. Geological evidence shows that the last major glacial melt, known as the Younger Dryas termination, occurred at precisely that time. Sea levels rose more than 120 meters over the next millennium, submerging vast coastal plains. If cities existed along those shores, their remains now lie beneath the continental shelf. The pattern of destruction is not limited to water. Around 1,650 BCE, the island of Thera-modern Santorini erupted with a force that dwarfed any recorded volcano in human history. The Minoan civilization on Crete, only 110 kilometers away, was devastated by the resulting tsunami. The event left a layer of pumice across the eastern Mediterranean, and some scholars believe it inspired the Greek memory of gods punishing a proud island city. The ash plume darkened skies as far as Egypt, where the papyrus of Ipuwer describes the river turned to blood and the sky raining fire. Farther east, in India, the Mahabharata describes cities burned by weapons of light. The text tells of a blast that turned sand into glass and left birds falling from the sky. In 2010, researchers from Rajasthan's archaeological department found layers of fused sand near the site of the ancient city of Dolavira. The composition resembled desert glass, formed under extreme heat, similar to the glass discovered in Libya's Sahara, where a single patch covers hundreds of square kilometers. When samples were analyzed, their structure showed rapid melting followed by cooling in microseconds. No known volcano or lightning strike could explain it. In North America, beneath the plains of the Dakotas and the Great Lakes, scientists discovered a black mat of carbon and nanodiamonds dating to around 12,800 years ago, the same moment the Younger Dryas began. The layer contains tiny glass spherules formed at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. Researchers at the University of Kansas proposed that a fragmented comet struck the Laurentide ice sheet, vaporizing massive volumes of water and triggering floods that swept across continents. Native American oral histories from the Clovis period recall the stars that fell and the great fire that followed. South America holds its own memories. The Quechua and Aymara peoples speak of Unu Pachacuti, the water that turned the world upside down. In the highlands of Peru and Bolivia, lake sediment cores show a sudden influx of marine microfossils around 10,000 BCE, suggesting saltwater intrusion at extreme altitude. The city of Tiwanaku, standing 3,800 meters above sea level, bears erosion marks that imply prolonged submersion. Some of its megaliths are worn as if by waves, though no sea has touched the Andes in recorded time. China's bamboo annals, compiled around 296 BCE, recount 10 suns that rose together and scorched the earth. The Emperor Yao is said to have sent an archer to shoot 9 of them down. Around the same period, the Shujing describes the Great Flood, lasting decades, which reshaped rivers and mountains. Geological studies of the Yellow River Valley show a massive landslide dam breaking around 1920 BCE, unleashing torrents across hundreds of kilometers. The legend of Yu the Great, who tamed the flood by channeling it, may preserve memory of this cataclysm. In Japan, the Kojiki speaks of the age when the land was drifting. The phrase refers to a time when islands rose and sank repeatedly. Around 3000 BCE, sea levels in the region did fluctuate rapidly, submerging coastal settlements. The Jomon people built elevated dwellings and ceremonial mounds that now lie underwater. Similar structures have been mapped off the coast of Yonaguni since 1987, terraced platforms, and steps that some divers believe are artificial. The Arctic also bears signs of sudden change. Ice cores from Greenland reveal a dramatic rise in atmospheric dust and acidity around 10,900 BCE, consistent with massive wildfires. Temperatures dropped by up to 8 degrees Celsius within a single century. The cause remains debated: a comet impact, a volcanic chain reaction, or a rapid release of meltwater disrupting ocean currents. Whatever the trigger, it coincides with the disappearance of the megafauna, the mammoth, mastodon, and giant sloth, and the collapse of early human settlements in northern regions. Every culture that remembers this era links it with the departure of gods. The Sumerians said the Anunnaki ascended to the heavens before the flood. The Egyptians wrote that Thoth recorded the designs of the world before the waters rose. The Mayans believed that the old gods destroyed the previous creation with fire and storm before fashioning the new one from maize. The Polynesians spoke of Tangaroa retreating beneath the sea when the balance of the world was broken. To later generations, these were moral stories, punishment for pride or corruption. But beneath the language of myth lies description: environmental collapse, celestial events, global change. The builders of the earliest monuments, the watchers of the skies, and the writers of stone all seem to have inherited the same memory of a world reset. The scars of that age remain in the planet itself. They can be read in polar ice, in the chemistry of sediments, in shorelines that lie far inland. They mark the boundary between the world of the gods and the world that followed the moment when something immense ended, and civilization began again from what was left. The return of the sky watchers. When the floods withdrew and the fires quieted, what remained were skies filled with unfamiliar stars. Survivors of those ages of ruin looked upward and saw a world that had changed shape. The constellations that once guided their calendars no longer rose where they used to. New ones appeared on the horizon, and the movements of the heavens had shifted. For the first time in memory, time itself seemed broken. It was then that the watchers of the sky returned not as gods this time, but as seekers. In the valley of the Nile, sometime around 3100 BCE, priests began rebuilding the order of heaven. They created the earliest star maps, carving them on tomb ceilings like those found at Dendera and Thebes. Each star was given a name, each movement recorded through long nights of observation. The Egyptians called these keepers of the sky the Deccan priests. Their duty was to note when each group of stars rose just before dawn. From this came the first calendar, 12 months, 3 weeks of 10 days each, with 5 added days to balance the year. The rising of Sirius, they noticed, always came before the annual flooding of the Nile. To them, it was a sign that the gods had not vanished entirely, only retreated into the firmament. Across the Euphrates, in Sumer, the same impulse took form. The ziggurats of Ur and Babylon were not only temples, but platforms for watching the stars. The topmost level, open to the night, served as an observatory. By 1800 BCE, Babylonian scholars had divided the sky into constellations that are still used today: Leo, Taurus, Scorpio. Clay tablets, such as the Enuma Anu Enlil, record thousands of astronomical observations, eclipses, comets, and planetary conjunctions. Each was tied to predictions about kingdoms and harvests, but behind the ritual meaning lay careful measurement. The watchers had turned divine memory into science. On the Anatolian plain, the Hittites built sanctuaries that followed solar patterns. At Yazilikaya, carved chambers align with the rising of the summer solstice sun, illuminating processions of gods etched into limestone. The alignment marks not a festival, but a reset, a reminder of balance restored after cycles of disruption. When sunlight enters the inner chamber, the carvings seem to move, as if life is briefly returned to stone. Farther east, in the Indus Valley, around 2000 BCE, urban planners of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro laid their streets along north-south and east-west axes. Archaeologists found sighting stones built into rooftops, likely used to track solstitial shadows. The city itself was a clock, measuring seasons through light. When the monsoon came, it matched the turning of the heavens. In China, sky watchers recorded eclipses as early as 2137 BCE. One bamboo chronicle tells of two astronomers, Si and Ho, executed for failing to predict an eclipse that frightened the emperor. Their failure was not superstition, it was a lapse in a scientific duty. The Chinese understood that celestial regularity mirrored earthly order. Their imperial capital was always aligned to the pole star, which they called the pivot of heaven. To lose alignment meant to lose the mandate to rule. After the flood legends faded into ritual, the watchers reappeared across oceans. The Olmec, in what is now Mexico, built La Venta and San Lorenzo on exact magnetic alignments. Their altars depict figures emerging from cave mouths, holding celestial symbols, half man, half sky being. Later, the Maya would refine this into complex astronomy, predicting eclipses and solstices centuries in advance. Their observatories, like the circular tower at Chichén Itzá, were built for the eye, not for worship. Windows framed specific star paths, allowing priests to track Venus and Mars across the horizon. In the Mediterranean, the Greek philosopher Thales of Miletus predicted a solar eclipse in 585 BCE, the first recorded in history. His prediction turned what had once been divine into measurable law. He learned from Babylonian records, proving that the lineage of watchers had not broken. It had only changed language. To the Greeks, these were not the return of gods, but of understanding. The stars no longer ruled fate, they revealed pattern. The same rediscovery unfolded in the Andes. Long after the destruction of Tiwanaku, new peoples watched the sky from the island of the sun on Lake Titicaca. They built pillars, aligned with solstices, marking the rebirth of the year. At Cusco, the Inca divided the horizon into sectors, each assigned to a noble family responsible for observing specific constellations. The Milky Way was their river of heaven, mirrored by the Urubamba River below. When stars vanished behind clouds, they said the gods were walking the earth. In Europe's north, the builders of megalithic tombs like Newgrange in Ireland arranged their passages so that the sunrise on winter solstice illuminated the chamber's deepest point. For centuries, the tomb lay buried, its alignment forgotten. When it was rediscovered in 1699, sunlight still struck the same inner stone, precisely at the same moment it had thousands of years earlier. The precision suggests that the ancient sky watchers understood precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, long before modern astronomy confirmed it. Even in isolation, distant cultures began to rebuild cosmic order. The Polynesians of the Pacific navigated by stars invisible from northern latitudes. They memorized hundreds of star paths and used them to cross thousands of kilometers of open ocean. Their canoes carried chants, naming each rising and setting star, preserving maps not on paper but in song. The watchers had left observatories of stone, their descendants turned to observatories of memory. By the first millennium BCE, nearly every civilization had returned to the same conclusion, that stability on Earth depended on understanding the sky. The gods who had left were now abstractions, planets, constellations, cycles. In the temples of Babylon, the priest astronomers compiled records that would later form the basis of Greek astronomy. In Egypt, priests timed their rituals to the heliacal rising of stars. In Mesoamerica, entire histories were rewritten as celestial calendars. Some traditions claimed the watchers themselves had returned not in visible form, but through instruction. The Dogon people of Mali speak of beings called the Nomo, who came from the star Sirius and taught them the structure of the solar system, including details of Sirius's invisible companion star, Sirius B, discovered by telescopes only in the 19th century. Whether inherited myth or encoded knowledge, the story fits the same pattern: wisdom descending from the sky, then retreating once the knowledge was restored. Archaeologists now recognize this era as the beginning of recorded astronomy. Yet the continuity with earlier ages suggests something more than invention. Across regions, the rebuilding of sky knowledge followed the same geometry, the same attention to alignment, as if humanity were retracing old instructions. Temples faced the same stars their ancestors had once watched before the floods. Stone markers rose again, this time not as offerings to absent gods, but as tools to measure their silence. The Watcher's return was not about the arrival of new beings, it was about remembrance. The heavens had changed, but the act of watching remained. Through generations, humans lifted their eyes once more, patient and precise, rebuilding the dialogue between earth and sky that had nearly been lost. In doing so, they bridged the distance between myth and science, between what had been destroyed and what could still be known. The lost machines of the gods. Scattered through the ruins of the ancient world are fragments of mechanisms, objects that do not fit neatly into their supposed centuries. They are rare, often damaged, and almost always misunderstood. Yet they hint at a level of knowledge that should not have existed in the hands that made them. The ancients built in stone, but they also built in metal, glass, and movement. These are the traces of machines left behind. In 1901, sponge divers off the coast of Antikythera, a small Greek island between Kythera and Crete, discovered the remains of a shipwreck from around 100 BCE. Among statues and pottery lay a corroded lump of bronze. It was taken to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, where for decades it drew little attention. Only in 1951 did physicist Derek de Solla Price notice its gear teeth. After 20 years of study and X-ray imaging, he concluded that it was a mechanical computer capable of predicting the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. The Antikythera mechanism contained more than 30 gears, each precisely cut, with ratios matching known astronomical cycles. When turned by a hand crank, it displayed eclipses, the phases of the moon, and even the timing of ancient athletic games. The gears were made of bronze, cut so finely that the error margin was less than a millimeter. Modern replicas function perfectly, yet no other device of its kind appears for at least 1,000 years afterward. Its knowledge arrived complete, then vanished. In Baghdad, a clay jar found near Kujut Rabu in 1938 puzzled archaeologists for decades. The vessel contained a copper cylinder held by an asphalt stopper, and inside was an iron rod. When filled with an acidic liquid vinegar or wine, it produced a small electrical current. Wilhelm Koenig, the German archaeologist who studied it, suggested it was a galvanic cell, an ancient battery. Replicas built in laboratories generated up to 1 volt of power. Some researchers proposed it was used for electroplating gold onto silver. No tools for that process have been found, but the theory persists. The object dates to between 200 BCE and 200 CE. Its simple design, works perfectly in principle. From the same region, Assyrian reliefs show figures carrying devices shaped like buckets, connected to wristbands by cords. The carvings are repetitive, consistent across centuries. Some have interpreted them as ritual objects. Others note that their form resembles modern capacitor jars. There is no proof either way, yet the repetition implies function rather than decoration. In China, archaeologists uncovered the south-pointing chariot, described in Han Dynasty texts from around 260 CE. It used differential gears to keep a pointer facing south, regardless of how the chariot turned a mechanical compass, based not on magnetism, but on gearing. The same principle of differential motion would not reappear in Europe until the 18th century. The Chinese version worked with wooden gears and ropes, its design preserved in text, though the earliest prototypes have decayed. At Roman sites, complex water pumps and automatic doors, operated by steam pressure, have been documented. The engineer Hero of Alexandria, writing around 60 CE, described machines powered by heated air. His aeolipile, a hollow sphere spinning on jets of steam, was a primitive turbine. It could generate rotational motion from heat. Hero also designed coin-operated dispensers and mechanical theatres using pulleys and counterweights. His work, recorded in the treatise Pneumatica, reads like an instruction manual for devices centuries ahead of their time. Even earlier examples exist. In 2016, divers near Sicily recovered bronze fragments from another ancient shipwreck. Among them were gear parts similar to those of the Antikythera mechanism, but smaller, suggesting it was not unique. Ancient writers hinted at such devices. Cicero mentioned a sphere of Archimedes that could reproduce the motions of celestial bodies. The Roman general Marcellus brought it from Syracuse after Archimedes' death in 212 BCE. It was displayed in Rome, but the mechanism itself was never found. In India, texts from the Gupta period describe automated water clocks and rotating celestial globes. The mathematician Aryabhata, writing in 499 CE, referred to an instrument of wheels that modelled planetary motion. Inscriptions at the Iron Pillar of Delhi, erected around 400 CE, reveal metallurgical knowledge still unexplained. The pillar stands over 7 meters tall and has resisted corrosion for 1,600 years. Its iron contains a thin protective film of misolite, a compound of iron, oxygen, and hydrogen, unknown to modern steelmaking until recent decades. The process that formed it remains uncertain. The same anomaly appears in the Damascus blades of the medieval Middle East, forged with microscopic carbon nanotubes that give the metal both strength and flexibility. These structures were discovered in the 20th century using electron microscopy. The ancient smiths achieved them by folding and cooling steel in precise cycles, but their knowledge disappeared by the 18th century. When European metallurgists tried to replicate the process, they could not. It was rediscovered only by accident, confirming that technical secrets can vanish as completely as languages. Some relics suggest even more advanced skill. In the ruins of Dendera, Egypt, reliefs show bulb-shaped glass objects connected to thick cords, sometimes called the Dendera lights. Egyptologists interpret them as symbolic representations of the lotus and serpent images of creation. Others point to their resemblance to early electrical lamps. Near them, copper rods and traces of insulating resins were found, though not in direct context. The idea remains speculative, but the imagery persists light, emerging from darkness, powered by a coiled serpent. In Peru, the Nazca culture created fine lines stretching for kilometers and pottery decorated with geometric precision. Recent LiDAR surveys found buried stone channels that form exact right angles and parallel tracks, as if cut by survey instruments. The same precision appears in the polygonal masonry of Cusco and Ollantaytambo, where stone faces show machine-like polish, no inscriptions record how this was done. Across continents, patterns emerge. Isolated examples of mechanisms, alloys, and design principles that appear too advanced for their context, often followed by disappearance. Knowledge rises suddenly, then fades. The Antikythera device, the Baghdad jar, the Dendera reliefs, the Damascus stele all are separated by oceans and millennia, yet share the same trajectory. They appear fully formed, serve briefly, then are forgotten. The causes of loss are simple enough: war, fire, empire, collapse. But the persistence of similar designs in distant places suggests that the knowledge may have had deeper roots. The ancients may not have invented it anew each time. They could have been recovering fragments of an older inheritance, echoing tools used by those they once called gods. Today, the gears of Antikythera rest in a climate-controlled case. The Baghdad jar sits in a quiet museum drawer. Their function is understood, but their origin remains unanchored. Between myth and machinery lies a silence no inscription explains. The machines work, yet the hands that built them have vanished. The memory of stone and sky. Every civilization leaves a pattern behind, even when its language dies. The shape of temples, the orientation of streets, the choice of symbols on coins, all of these form a kind of persistence. They are not coincidence. They are memory solidified in materials. Across centuries, those who came after repeated what they no longer fully understood, following forms that felt older than themselves. Through these repetitions, the world remembered. At Giza, the pyramid's base aligns almost perfectly to true north. 1,000 years later, the same precision reappeared in the city plan of Alexandria. When Greek architects laid its foundations in 331 BCE, they placed its main axis so that the sun would rise directly above it on the day of Alexander's birth. The pattern of orientation sky-guiding stone remained intact long after the builders had forgotten who first taught it. The same thread stretches east to Babylon, where the Atemenanki ziggurat stood as a 7-tiered link between heaven and earth. Its name means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. When it collapsed, later rulers rebuilt it again and again. By the time of Nebuchadnezzar II, its original purpose was no longer clear, yet its form was still followed. The pattern endured even when its meaning had become legend. In Greece, the Parthenon's architects followed harmonic ratios already ancient in Egypt. The structure's columns curve subtly inward, the platform bows upward. Each proportion mirrors the same mathematical constants found in earlier temples along the Nile. Scholars describe this as aesthetic evolution, but in its repetition, one can see continuity, a memory passed not through writing, but through geometry. The Mayans and the Egyptians, though separated by oceans, both built stairways that counted the days of the solar year. Both placed serpent carvings along the edges so that on equinox days the shadow descended in a wave of light. No trade or contact can explain the duplication. It suggests that when civilizations rebuild after disaster, they return instinctively to the same cosmic template. The sky serves as archive, stone becomes the memory drive. In the Andes, the Incas described their empire as Tawantinsuyu, the 4 quarters of the world. They divided land and stars by the same geometry. Their capital, Cusco, was built in the shape of a puma, its teeth the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, its tail the meeting of rivers. The animal was sacred, but its design also mirrored constellations visible above the city. The same mirrored logic appears in Egypt, where the Nile and the Milky Way were considered reflections of each other. Human planning and celestial pattern moved in tandem. In the Far East, Chinese astronomers called their cosmic chart the heavenly net. Imperial cities were laid out as its projection on Earth, with gates marking the cardinal directions. The Forbidden City's north-south axis aligns with the meridian line connecting the pole star and the sun at noon. When new dynasties rose, they kept the same alignment. The architecture changed, but the sky remained the model. Even after literacy faded from certain regions, stone continued the work of memory. In northern Europe, megalithic circles like Kallanish and Brodgar align with solstices and lunar extremes. Their builders left no written language, yet the stones themselves preserve an unbroken record of observation. Modern software confirms their alignments with remarkable precision. The circle is both calendar and archive. Each rising and setting star plays back a message encoded 5,000 years ago. At Angkor in Cambodia, the vast temple complex of Angkor Wat mirrors the constellation Draco at the time of its construction. Its galleries count cosmic time in cubits and terraces, marking cycles of the moon and precession of the equinoxes. Inscriptions call it the city of heaven on earth. After its abandonment, the jungle reclaimed it, yet the symmetry held. When rediscovered in the 19th century, its stones still followed the same celestial blueprint. Some ancient builders seemed to treat memory itself as a substance. The Sumerian god Nabu was called Lord of the Tablet, Keeper of all knowledge. The Egyptians placed stone jars inside tombs, not for preservation of goods, but of word-sealed scrolls recording geometry, recipes, and hymns. At Edfu, an inscription refers to a building plan of the primeval temple, preserved from the age before the flood and copied exactly as it was shown. Each new temple thus became a reinstantiation of an older one, keeping alive not merely design, but intention. Archaeology shows that identical ratios, measurements, and stellar alignments recur independently. A base-to-height ratio matching 2 pi in Egypt, a golden proportion at Teotihuacan, a right-angled triangle of 3-4-5 at Delphi, and in the Chinese Loshu Square. These constants act like shared memory codes, carried through migrations and rebuilt after catastrophe. When language fails, numbers remain. Even myth participates in this memory. Flood legends, sky gods, and serpent symbols appear everywhere, translated into local idioms but preserving the same structure: chaos, descent, order, renewal. The serpent, swallowing its tail in Norse myth, the Ouroboros, matches the Mayan vision of the celestial snake encircling the world. In both, the sky is the record and the earth the tablet. Modern researchers studying geomagnetic anomalies at ancient sites find recurring placements at nodal points where gravitational and magnetic lines of Earth converge. The builders may not have known the physics, but they sensed the balance. Their structures align not only to stars, but to the planet's invisible grids, as if connecting Earth memory to cosmic rhythm. Throughout history, when empires fell, these alignments remained as reference points. Pilgrims rebuilt shrines on the same foundations. Astronomers recalibrated calendars using the same stars. The continuity suggests that humanity's truest archive is spatial, not written a dialogue between ground and sky repeated over millennia. In this way, stone remembers what words forget. The ziggurat, the pyramid, the circle, the axis, all are expressions of recall. The disasters that erased languages could not erase proportion. Each civilization inherited fragments of an older design, rebuilding it under new names. They believed they were honoring their gods, but what they were truly doing was maintaining synchronization, keeping the rhythm of the world aligned with the heavens. That rhythm, encoded in geometry and preserved in ruin, may be the real legacy of those who once ruled the earth. Long after their names faded, their alignments still point to the same stars. The planet itself, carved and measured, carries the memory forward. Stone and sky remain in dialogue, each reflecting the other, continuing a conversation that began long before recorded time and has never completely stopped. The departure? At the close of the Bronze Age, between 1000 200 and 900 BCE, the written tone of the ancient world began to change. The confident inscriptions that once claimed direct communion with the gods became quieter. Temples still rose, but their dedications shifted from eyewitness accounts to remembrance. The gods were no longer described as walking among men. They were said to have withdrawn. In Mesopotamia, the last tablets written in Sumerian, a language once called the tongue of the gods, were copied only by scholars. The living speech of the people had already turned to Akkadian, then Aramaic. A tablet from Ur, dated to around 2000 BCE, still speaks of the divine descending in fire. By 1000 BCE, new writings call them those who left for the heavens. The shift is subtle but final. It marks a change from event to echo. In Egypt, the same silence unfolded in stone. The Old Kingdom pyramids contained precise instructions for the pharaoh's ascent to the stars, written on walls as guides for an expected journey. By the New Kingdom, the texts became funerary spells for a passage no one claimed to witness. The opening of the mouth ceremony, once a ritual of rebirth, had become theatre performed, not believed. The gods who once gave the laws of Ma'at were now invoked only through statues, carried through streets but no longer speaking. The collapse of empires around 1200 BCE, the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, the Kassites, coincided with the disappearance of many high temples. Archaeologists call it the Late Bronze Age collapse, marked by burning cities and vanished trade routes. To the scribes who survived, it was something else, the departure of guidance. Egyptian papyri from this time lament, "The gods have turned away from man." The phrasing repeats in later Hebrew texts. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. In Greece, poets transformed divine presence into memory. Hesiod's Works and Days describes an earlier race of golden men who lived under the rule of gods, never suffering or toiling. When they vanished, the earth covered them, and the age of bronze began. In Plato's Phaedrus, written centuries later, even the most rational minds spoke of a world where divine madness once inspired invention. Philosophy replaced prayer, but the yearning remained. In the East, the Vedic hymns of India recorded the same transition. Early verses speak of beings who moved between sky and earth, guiding men and teaching order. Later, Upanishads reframe them as metaphors forces within, not visitors without. The celestial chariots of Agni became symbols for inner light. The gods were reinterpreted into psychology. A withdrawal of presence turned into an awakening of thought. Chinese records echo this pattern. In the oldest annals of the Zhou, rulers claimed the mandate of heaven, suggesting a direct line of legitimacy from above. By the time of Confucius, that mandate had become moral, not celestial. "Heaven does not speak," the sage said. "It acts through order." The divine voice, once expected to speak, was replaced by principle. The heavens were still studied, but now they were silent. Among the Maya, the long count calendar marked an ending around 3114 BCE, and a new beginning centuries later. In their inscriptions, the gods departed through portals in the sky, leaving kings to rule on their behalf. When those kings carved their histories, they used the same verbs once reserved for gods descend, manifest, rise, but their meaning had changed. Authority was inherited, not granted. The language of divinity became the language of government. In Mesopotamia, temple archives after 1000 BCE contain long lists of rituals, schedules for offerings, precise quantities of incense, weights of silver. They are procedural, bureaucratic, lifeless. The priests recorded everything but revelation. One tablet from Sippar reads, "The smoke rises, but no answer comes." Even as silence spread, the idea of return persisted. Prophets in Canaan spoke of Yahweh descending again, upon the cloud. Zoroastrian texts from Persia describe Ahura Mazda's withdrawal until the final renovation of the world. The Greeks waited for Apollo to reappear from Hyperborea. The Maya foretold the return of Kukulkan. Each culture recorded the same promise in different words, that those who left would one day be seen again. By the dawn of the first millennium BCE, the heavens had become distance. Astronomy replaced myth. Observatories rose where temples had stood. Priests became mathematicians, reading meaning from movements instead of messages. In Babylon, the compilation of planetary records, known as the Mull, Apin tablets systematized the sky into predictable order. The divine had turned mechanical. In the ruins of Hattusa, capital of the Hittites, an inscription from the 13th century BCE captures the human side of that transition. It reads, "The gods have gone to their mountain. The temples are empty. We still make the offerings, for they may remember us." The stone bears marks of fire, its top cracked by heat, as if lightning had struck. The words are the last known written statement of a king to his vanished gods. The Hebrews wrote of cherubim guarding a closed gate to Eden. The Greeks spoke of Pandora's jar sealing hope away. The Egyptians depicted the last of their divine rulers sailing into the sky aboard the solar bark. All describe an ending, a separation between the mortal and the celestial. The link that once joined them, geometry, ritual, sound, was broken. Afterward came the Iron Age, the age of tools and weapons, of states and armies. The monuments of earlier centuries became mysteries. People visited the ruins of their ancestors and wondered who had built them. Inscriptions were copied without understanding. Temples were converted to new faiths. Myths turned into religions. The gods who once ruled were remembered as legends, their images redrawn in new forms. Yet even in their absence, the traces remained. Alignments still matched the stars, ratios still encoded cosmic law, and the same numbers continued to govern architecture, calendars, and song. The gods had departed, but their design persisted. Humanity inherited the framework of their order, using it long after forgetting its source. From then onward, the heavens stayed silent. People no longer waited for voices from above. They searched for meaning within the patterns themselves. Every new science, every map of stars or atoms, would follow the same principle the ancients once obeyed, to measure the unseen by what remains visible. The world moved forward, guided by echoes. The gods had left, but the memory of their presence still shaped every line drawn on earth. The echo civilization. By the dawn of the classical world, the memory of gods had become philosophy, and the rituals that once summoned thunder had turned into geometry, logic, and proportion. The new civilizations, Greece, Rome, and their inheritors, believed they were founding something original. In truth, they were building over ruins, guided by fragments they could not name. The echo of what came before still shaped their cities, their symbols, and their thought. In Greece, temple builders continued the ancient language of measure. The Parthenon's foundation was laid on the same 2-pi ratio that defined the pyramids of Giza. Its columns bowed inward, not for aesthetics, but to correct optical illusion, a principle already known to Egyptian architects millennia earlier. The golden ratio, phi, determined the spacing of steps, the height of walls, and the design of amphorae. The Greeks thought they had discovered beauty through mathematics, but they were remembering something older, an unbroken rule that harmony could be drawn from number. The philosopher Thales of Miletus, who lived around 600 BCE, was among the first to study geometry in Egypt. When he returned home, he taught that all things are full of gods, meaning that the laws of nature themselves carried divine order. His student Anaximander drew the first known map of the world and called the universe cosmos, a term for both beauty and arrangement. In their language, science and reverence were the same act. To measure was to honor. At Delphi, where the oracle gave her cryptic messages, the temple's stone lintel bore the words Gnothi Sutan, know thyself. Beneath the floor, priests observed vapor rising from cracks in the rock and interpreted them as signs. Above, the temple was built to echo the same Pythagorean harmonies as musical strings. The geometry of the building itself was a response device, amplifying sound, reflecting light. Even prophecy had become a function of architecture. By the 5th century BCE, Pythagoras taught that numbers were the building blocks of the universe. He called them living intelligences. His followers believed that studying mathematics was a sacred path, inherited from an earlier priesthood who had once measured the heavens. The tetracty's 10 points arranged in a triangle became their symbol. It represented the harmony between the finite and the infinite, between earth and sky. That triangle appears again in Babylonian tablets, in Egyptian art, and later in Roman design, unchanged across thousands of years. When Plato founded the Academy in 387 BCE, he inscribed above its gate, "Let none ignorant of geometry enter here." In his dialogue Timaeus, he described creation as the work of a divine craftsman who shaped matter using perfect geometric forms, tetrahedron, cube, icosahedron. These were not symbols to him, but literal blueprints of reality. His world soul moved according to harmonic ratios identical to those found in Sumerian music and Egyptian architecture. In Plato's system, the gods had become geometry itself. Aristotle, his student, replaced divine craft with natural motion, yet kept the same structure, unmoved mover, nested spheres, orderly heavens. The old gods had not disappeared, they had become laws. By the time of Euclid, geometry had ceased to be ritual and had become proof, but its spirit was unchanged. Each theorem was a rediscovery of relationships once carved into stone temples. Rome inherited the same architecture of reason. Its engineers built aqueducts, domes, and roads aligned to the cardinal directions. The Pantheon, constructed under Emperor Hadrian around 125 CE, was both temple and instrument. Its dome measures 43.3 meters in diameter, equal to its height. The oculus, at the center 8 meters wide, casts a beam of sunlight that moves across the interior at exact times of year, marking equinoxes and solstices. At noon, the beam falls directly onto the entrance. The effect is not symbolic, it is calibration. The building operates as a solar clock, linking empire and cosmos in a single motion. Vitruvius, the Roman architect writing around 20 BCE, preserved what was left of sacred proportion. His treatise De Architectura describes how the human body reflects the geometry of temples. Just as nature designed the human body, he wrote, so the ancients designed temples from the human form. His words would later inspire Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, a direct continuation of the same belief once held by Egyptian sculptors and Sumerian priests, that the measure of man and the measure of the universe were one. When Rome's political order crumbled, its intellectual one survived. The Christian monasteries that rose after the empire's fall preserved the works of Plato, Aristotle, and Ptolemy texts that carried the lineage of celestial measurement into the Middle Ages. Monks copied diagrams of spheres and proportions without always understanding their origin. Cathedrals that appeared centuries later, such as Chartres and Amiens, were built on those forgotten geometries. Their rose windows mirrored planetary orbits. Their floor plans echoed the ratio of pi. The faith had changed, but the structure of its temples still followed the architecture of the gods. In the Islamic Golden Age, from the 8th to 13th centuries, scholars in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba translated the same Greek works back into Arabic. They built observatories and astrolabes, combining inherited geometry with new precision. The Dome of the Rock, completed in 691 CE, used proportions derived from hexagonal symmetry, a form found also in ancient ziggurats. The star patterns that decorate its tiles are mathematical tessellations, the visual memory of cosmic order. The legacy of these calculations reached even farther east. In India, Gupta-era scholars expanded Greek astronomy into trigonometry. In China, Tang dynasty architects used modular designs based on harmonic ratios. In Mesoamerica, the Toltecs rebuilt earlier ruins according to the same solstitial alignments. Everywhere the pattern reappeared, structure rising from silence, design guided by stars, the geometry of faith becoming the architecture of knowledge. By the Renaissance, Europe rediscovered what had never truly been lost. Brunelleschi's dome in Florence followed the same celestial proportions as the Pantheon. Galileo's telescopes sought the same heavens the Babylonian scribes had charted. Kepler described the orbits of planets using harmonic ratios identical to those taught by Pythagoras. Each discovery was new only in form. In substance, it was a reawakening. The eco-civilization stretched across millennia, uniting the forgotten and the remembered. Its builders no longer invoked the names of ancient gods, yet they followed their blueprint. Every library, observatory, and city, aligned by compass or solstice, was another verse in the same long song. The gods had departed, but their architecture remained alive, absorbed into philosophy, rebuilt as science, carried forward as if memory itself had taken root in the human mind. The modern world, though made of glass and circuits, still builds according to their legacy. The grid of cities follows cardinal directions. Time is measured in inherited cycles. Knowledge still begins with geometry. The language of the gods became mathematics, their temples became laboratories, and their myths became equations. What endures is not belief, but pattern, the quiet persistence of structure itself. The ruins still stand silent, precise, untouched by time. The same stars that watch the builders still hang above us, unchanged. Maybe the gods never left at all. Maybe we just stopped listening. Every carved stone, every lost number, every myth that refuses to fade suggests a truth too large to forget. The story of the gods is not about their power, it's about what remains when power disappears. If you found meaning in their silence, there are more questions waiting in the next journey. The past is still speaking quietly, patiently, through stone and sky. Join us again as we follow the next trail of forgotten memory. Subscribe and keep watching the patterns that the ancients left behind, because somewhere in those patterns, the story continues.